I used to think the worst kind of loneliness was the kind you feel when you come home to an empty house. I know better now. The worst loneliness is coming home to a house full of people who speak to you like you're a guest, or worse, an inconvenience, in the life you built for them. That night, I walked through my own front door with the grocery bags cutting into my palms, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and a strange sensation pulsing at the base of my throat, something like being watched, or measured, or quietly erased. I didn't know it yet, but I was already disappearing. Evan's voice drifted from the living room. Warm. Animated. A tone he rarely used with me anymore unless he was rehearsing something, or performing. When I rounded the corner, I froze. He was on a video call, leaning back on the couch I'd paid for, smiling in that curated, charming way he always dismissed as just being friendly. Except this time he wasn't alone. A woman's laugh spilled through the speakers, light, flirtatious, too familiar. Evan didn't notice me. Not even when I shifted the grocery bags to my hip. He was busy telling a story. My story. And that's when she surprised me with a weekend in Asheville, he said, that soft grin spreading across his face. I swear, it was the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me. My stomach dropped. I was the one who planned that trip for him 3 years ago. I paid for the cabin, packed the car, even rearranged my project deadlines to make it work. But the woman on his screen, the one with glossy hair and an adoring expression, nodded like she'd lived it with him. Like she was the she in his life. My throat tightened as I listened, frozen in place. Evan talked about our memories the way someone might talk about an inheritance they'd stolen and polished to pass off as their own. But I had no idea what was coming next. The woman leaned forward and whispered something I couldn't quite catch. Evan's smile sharpened, the kind he used right before he lied, and he lowered his voice. Yeah, he said softly. Don't worry. She won't be a problem. A chill ran through me so suddenly I almost dropped the groceries. I didn't know who she was supposed to be in his new script, me or her. And that's when everything shifted. I realized, standing there in my own home, that Evan had rewritten our relationship, and quietly recast me as the other woman in my own life. If only I knew what I was walking into. The thing about Evan is that he never started out cruel. Or maybe he did, and I was too busy carrying the weight of our life to notice the cracks forming beneath me. I used to think emotional erosion happens suddenly, like a dam breaking, but in reality it's slower, steady drops of dismissal carving you into someone unrecognizable. It didn't help that I was raised to stay reasonable, as my mother always said. Don't raise your voice. Don't embarrass anyone. Don't make problems. Maybe that's why Evan felt so comfortable rewriting our story in front of another woman. He knew I wouldn't cause a scene. He knew I'd swallow the shock like I swallowed everything else. As I set the groceries on the counter, I could still hear murmurs from the living room. He kept his voice low, but not low enough that I couldn't make out the cadence, the intimate register, I used to call it. A tone he never used with me anymore, unless he needed something. Reassurance, validation, money. The house was spotless, because I'd spent the morning cleaning it before work, but the air felt stale somehow. Heavy. Like it was holding its breath. When Evan finally ended the call and wandered into the kitchen, he barely glanced at me. You're home early, he said, grabbing a drink from the fridge I'd stocked. It's 7, I replied. He shrugged like time didn't apply to him. Like all the hours I worked to keep him afloat were some optional hobby I indulged in. I waited for him to acknowledge what I'd overheard. He didn't. Instead, he opened a bag of chips and started eating, crumbs gathering at the corner of his mouth. Hey, did you get the almond milk I like? I stared at him for a second, really stared, and felt something unfamiliar flicker in my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was more like recognition. A quiet awareness that the man standing in front of me was not the man I'd built my life around. Or maybe he was, and I'd simply chosen not to see it. But I had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, the house looked the same as always, but it felt different. I felt different. I sat at the kitchen table reviewing quarterly projections while Evan slept in, his alarm blaring every 9 minutes. He always expected me to turn it off for him. He said the noise didn't wake him, even though it startled me out of concentration every single time. My phone buzzed with a message from my sister, Lily. "You're still coming to Mom's Sunday? Don't be late this time. You know how she gets." A familiar pinch settled in my stomach. My family adored Evan. They used to call him the charming one, while I was the stable one. It should have been a compliment, but it always sounded like a consolation prize. I texted back a neutral yes. Around 10, Evan finally dragged himself out of bed. "Hey," he mumbled, scratching the back of his neck. "Can you transfer $200 to my account? My card got declined last night." I looked up from my laptop. "For what?" "Gas." He didn't meet my eyes. I knew he was lying. His car was nearly full. "I filled it myself 2 days ago." Still, I opened my banking app. Not because I believed him, but because I'd been conditioned, over the course of 4 years, to solve problems before they became conflicts. I was 3 taps away from sending it when he added, "Oh, and I might have a meeting later." Don't wait on dinner. Meeting. That word sat in the air like a stain. Too vague. Too rehearsed. I could feel a question forming behind my ribs. "With who?" I asked lightly. He bristled, just a flicker, but enough. "Why do you always interrogate me?" I asked one question. "Exactly," he snapped. And just like that, I was the aggressor. He was the wounded one. The script flipped so quickly it made my head spin. I didn't push further. Not because I didn't want to, but because I'd learned there was no winning against someone who changed the rules as you played. If only I knew what I was walking into. 2 days later, the first undeniable red flag caught fire. I came home early from a client meeting, mentally exhausted, craving silence. Instead, I heard voices coming from upstairs. Evan's door was half shut. I stood still and listened. He was rehearsing. Not for work, he didn't have a job at the moment, but for a conversation. A romantic conversation. "Yeah, I told her we're just roommates," he said, his voice low and smooth. A pause. A laugh. "No, she doesn't suspect anything. She never pays attention." My blood froze. He wasn't on a call. He was practicing. Practicing a lie about me. The words burrowed into me, carving out something hollow. Roommates. That's how he introduced me now? It was almost funny in a sick way. I paid the mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance. I paid for his car repairs, his medical bills, even his phone, the same phone he used to charm this other woman. There was a question forming again, sharper this time, heavier. How long has he been rewriting me out of his life? I took a step back and the floor creaked. The rehearsal stopped. Evan yanked open the door, surprise flashing across his face before he masked it with irritation. "You're back early." "So it seems," I replied. He waited, tense, as if daring me to confront him. I didn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready to hear his lies spoken directly to me. Instead, I said, "Dinner will be ready in half an hour." His eyes narrowed, deflated. He was expecting a fight he could twist into proof of my instability. My calm denied him the performance. But that calm wasn't peace. It was strategy, or maybe instinct. And that's when everything shifted. Because in that moment, I knew something with painful clarity. Evan wasn't just cheating. He was constructing a world where I didn't exist. But the truth that was about to surface, I wasn't prepared for any of it. The betrayal didn't reveal itself all at once. It emerged the way mold does on something once fresh, quietly, spreading under the surface long before you notice the first dark spot. 3 days after overhearing Evan's roommate's rehearsal, the universe handed me clarity in the most humiliating way possible. It started on a Saturday morning, one of the few I'd hoped to spend in silence. Evan had been out late for his supposed meeting. He stumbled in around 1 a.m., smelling faintly of a floral perfume I didn't own. He muttered something about car trouble and collapsed on the couch without even glancing in my direction. By morning, he was acting chipper, too chipper, the way he always did when he was hiding something. I watched him move around the kitchen, opening cabinets, asking where things were stored even though he'd lived here for 3 years. "Do we have more honey?" he asked, rummaging pointlessly. "I bought 2 bottles yesterday," I said. "Second shelf." He smiled like I'd just solved a riddle designed for a child. "You're good at organizing things." It was the kind of comment that sounded like a compliment but felt like a pat on the head. Not affectionate, patronizing. He poured honey into his tea, humming a tune, and said, "Hey, I'm going to meet up with some people later. Networking stuff. You don't mind, right?" Networking. Another word he used when he meant anything but. I wanted to ask who he was meeting, why he was suddenly so invested in looking good, smelling good, lying better. But I didn't. Not out of fear, out of cold curiosity. Something was unfolding, and I needed to see the full shape of it before I spoke. But I had no idea what I was about to walk into. That afternoon, I went to my mother's house for the obligatory Sunday lunch we'd postponed to accommodate Evan's meeting. My mother greeted me with a tired smile, the kind people reserve for overachieving daughters they don't quite know how to comfort. "You look pale," she said, kissing my cheek. "Are you eating properly?" "I'm fine." She gave me the usual once-over, searching for flaws. Then she asked, in a tone too casual to be an accident, "Where's Evan?" "He didn't want to come. He had a commitment." "Ah." Her lips pursed. "Networking again?" She didn't approve of Evan's lack of stability, she just never said so directly. Lily arrived 10 minutes later, breezing into the room like she always did, full of stories and sunshine. She hugged me tightly, then pulled back with a curious expression. "I saw Evan last night." My stomach tightened. "Where?" "At the Wild Lantern." The Wild Lantern was a low-lit bar with velvet booths and a reputation for being a date spot. People didn't go there for networking. They went for intimacy. "With who?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Lily hesitated, something she rarely did. "I don't know. A woman. Really pretty." They looked close. The words lodged in my chest like splinters. I should have expected it. I should have been numb to the idea. But betrayal hits hardest when it confirms things you already knew but prayed weren't true. "Did he see you?" I asked. "No." I didn't want to interrupt. Her eyes softened. "I figured you knew." I nodded. A tight, practiced gesture. "Of course." The lie tasted metallic on my tongue. If only I knew how deep the deception went. When I returned home, the house was dim and quiet. Evan wasn't back yet. His keys weren't on the hook, his shoes weren't by the door. I walked through each room, not looking for him, but for something else. Something I couldn't name yet. In our bedroom, the sheets were wrinkled in a way they hadn't been that morning. His cologne lingered thicker than usual, almost oppressive. And on his nightstand, next to his watch, lay a small square object. A lipstick. Deep rose. Not mine. I picked it up carefully, as if it might burn me. The tube was warm, recently held. The shade was bold, confident. Nothing like the muted tones I wore because Evan once said bright colors made me look like I was trying too hard. I turned the lipstick over and saw a faint smudge of glitter on the cap. Not my glitter. At that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My chest didn't cave in. I felt something else instead, a quiet, chilling calm. I placed the lipstick back exactly where I'd found it and sat on the edge of the bed, hands on my knees, breathing evenly. He wasn't just cheating. He was bringing her into my home. Into my bed. Into the life I built for us. And he was sloppy enough to think I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that I wouldn't matter if I did. I waited. Minutes, then an hour. When Evan finally walked in, he whistled lightly, tossing his jacket onto a chair without looking at me. "How was your mom's?" he asked, checking his phone. "Fine." He nodded, bored. "Listen, I'm going to shower. I smell like smoke from the bar." Smoke from the bar. A detail designed to preempt questions he assumed I was too naive to ask. He moved toward the bathroom. I didn't follow. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I asked quietly, "Who were you with last night?" He stopped mid-step. Slowly, he turned toward me. "What do you mean?" "At the Wild Lantern." His jaw tightened the way it always did when he had to think fast. "You're imagining things." "I wasn't there." "Then who told you?" "My sister." His eyes flashed with irritation, not at the lie he'd been caught in, but at the inconvenience of being found out. "You know Lily exaggerates," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "She probably saw someone who looked like me. She said she saw you up close." He scoffed. "Then she's mistaken. She said you were with a woman." His lips curled into a mocking smile. "Wow. You're really buying into her drama. Unbelievable." I kept my voice calm. "There's lipstick on your nightstand." For a second, one honest, unfiltered second, his face went blank with panic. Then the mask returned. "That's yours," he snapped. "It's not. Maybe you forgot you bought it." "I didn't." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "God, you're being paranoid. You twist everything I do into something awful. Do you even hear yourself?" There it was, the shift. The inversion. The tactic he always used. Suddenly I was the one causing problems. I was unstable. I was unreasonable. "We're going in circles," I said quietly. "Because you won't trust me." He raised his voice, not shouting, but sharp enough to sting. Years ago, this tone would have made me shrink. Now it only made me observe him more clearly. He wasn't angry because he was innocent. He was angry because I was no longer silent. He grabbed his jacket again, muttering, "I need air," and stormed out. The door slammed. Silence followed. A thick, heavy silence that filled the house like a presence of its own. And that's when everything shifted. Because the moment that door closed, something in me clicked into place. This wasn't the betrayal. This was merely the confirmation. The real betrayal, the one beneath every lie, had been unfolding for years, woven into the fabric of our daily life, hidden in plain sight. I just hadn't seen it. Not yet. But I was about to. And what I found would change everything. The night Evan stormed out, I didn't chase him. That was the first shift, tiny but seismic. I simply sat on the couch, listening to the house breathe around me, feeling my heartbeat slow to something unnervingly steady. For years, I'd rushed to soothe conflict the second it sparked. I'd run after him with open arms and soft words, begging for peace that never lasted. But this time, I didn't. Instead, I looked at the lipstick again. Deep rose. Bold. Someone who walked through the world sure she deserved space. I placed it inside a drawer, not out of sentiment but strategy. I needed to understand what story Evan was telling, to her, to our families, to everyone, because it clearly wasn't the one he lived with me. When he finally returned hours later, the house had settled into a cold stillness that even he felt beneath his skin. He paused at the threshold, as if assessing the temperature of the air before entering. "You're still up," he muttered. I needed to think. He exhaled sharply, preparing a defensive stance. "Look, I'm sorry I raised my voice, okay? I've been stressed. You know I've been stressed." Stress. His universal excuse. "I know," I said softly. "But we need to talk tomorrow." "Really talk?" He nodded, too eager, too relieved. He thought we were slipping back into the old rhythm. He would apologize just enough to calm the waters, and I would forgive and forget. Except the waters weren't calm. Not anymore. But I had no idea how much deeper the truth went. The next day, I woke early. My mind felt sharper than it had in months. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and began what I knew was necessary, a quiet, methodical audit of the last 6 months. Evan still slept in our bed, sprawled across it like he owned the house he didn't pay for. But I didn't resent him, not yet. I was past the stage of wanting him to feel my pain. I wanted to understand the architecture of the deception. I checked bank statements. He'd been withdrawing cash regularly, small amounts, frequent. Enough to avoid attention. Enough to build a parallel life. I checked messages on our shared tablet. His texts to me were dry, practical, perfunctory. But to someone named M, messages deleted, but not the previews. He was warm, flirtatious, almost poetic. Like a version of himself I barely recognized. Then I noticed call logs. Long calls at night. Short calls midday. Repeated calls before he came home late. The pattern was unmistakable. And then I saw it, something I had not expected. A calendar entry, color-coded green, labeled anniversary dinner. For the next Friday. Not our anniversary. Ours was in October. This was February. My breath caught in my throat. He had built another timeline. Another set of milestones. Another version of reality parallel to mine, and I had never been meant to see it. I stared at that calendar entry until the room blurred, not from tears but from a realization so sharp it cleaved something open inside me. It wasn't just an affair. It was a replacement. He had rewritten me out of my own life. Around noon, he stumbled out of the bedroom, hair disheveled, eyes puffy. Morning, he grumbled. Afternoon, I replied without looking up. He poured cereal into a bowl, spilling some on the counter. He waited for me to clean it. I didn't move. After a beat, he huffed and wiped it himself. A small victory, but a telling one. "We should talk now," he said, leaning against the counter. Yes, I agreed. But he didn't start with honesty. He didn't even start with remorse. He started with his favorite weapon, pity. "I've been feeling lost," he began, sighing heavily. "Like I don't know who I am anymore. You're always working, and I feel like you don't need me." I blinked. Slowly. This wasn't a confession. It was a narrative shift, a preemptive excuse designed to make me comforting rather than discerning. You think the solution to feeling unnecessary is lying to me? I asked quietly. He flinched. I'm not lying to you. I tilted my head. Who is M? His mouth tightened. A coworker. You don't have a job. A former coworker. What's the anniversary dinner on your calendar? His pupils constricted. It's not what you think. What is it, then? A joke. Between who? I don't have to explain everything I do, he snapped. But his voice cracked, not with anger, but with fear. That fear told me everything. If only I had known that this was just the beginning. 2 days passed before the situation escalated again, not because Evan hid better, but because he grew careless. I came home from work early after a meeting was cancelled. My footsteps were soft on the hardwood floors. The house was quiet except for faint murmuring coming from the living room. I stopped. Evan was rehearsing again. This time he wasn't pretending to be on a call, he was reading lines to himself like an actor preparing for a role. Yes, he said in a low, affectionate tone, I told her she should find someone better. She deserves someone who actually listens. A pause, then softer, no, she's not taking it well. She gets emotional. My chest tightened. Not because of the words, but because they were rehearsed. Polished. Crafted. This was the breakup speech he was preparing for me. And he was rehearsing it, to get it right for someone else. I stepped closer. And yeah, he continued, I'll have the spare room ready for you when you visit. I want you to feel at home here. It'll be our space soon. The air around me grew thin. Our space. Our space. A new world he built inside my home. I cleared my throat. Evan's entire body jolted. He slammed his phone face down on the couch, even though the screen was dark. He turned toward me with a too-wide smile. You're home, he said brightly. How long have you been rehearsing that speech? I asked. His smile disappeared. I don't know what you're talking about. Tell me who you were planning to bring into my home. Your home, he echoed, as if the concept offended him. Yes. Mine. His jaw flexed. Suddenly, he wasn't scared. He was enraged. You always do this, he spat. You twist things. You act like I'm some monster. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply said, I heard everything. He froze completely. Then, in a move so theatrical it would have been laughable if it weren't terrifying, he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I can't believe this, he whispered. I can't believe you'd spy on me. A reverse victimhood pivot. Classic Evan. I didn't spy, I said softly. You rehearsed it loudly. I'm overwhelmed, he mumbled into his palms. I'm trying to be better. But you keep pushing me away. How? You're distant. You're cold. You're impossible to talk to. All recycled lines. All designed to break me down. But I didn't break. Something inside me, something dormant and iron strong, snapped awake. Evan, I said crisply, I'm not going to absorb any more blame. He looked up sharply, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Because it had. He wasn't losing control of me. He was losing control of the narrative. That night, I heard him whispering frantically in the bathroom. I leaned against the wall to hear him better. His voice trembled, and not in sadness. She's on to me, he whispered. I don't know how much she knows. No, she won't leave. She never leaves. I went cold. He wasn't worried about hurting me. He was worried about losing access to what I provided. Stability. Money. Housing. Reputation. I listened as he added, "Don't worry. I'll get her to calm down. She always does. Always." As if my predictability was an asset he counted on. But the truth I uncovered next, that was the crack that shattered everything. A week later, the final fragment of truth arrived from an unexpected source. A knock on the door. When I opened it, a woman stood there. Beautiful. Polished. Deep rose lipstick. Her expression flickered between politeness and something like dread. "Hi," she said softly. "Is Evan here?" My pulse stilled. "He's not home." "Oh." She hesitated. I think there's been a misunderstanding." No rehearsal. No performance. Just raw unease. "You must be M," I said. She flinched. "Yes." A long silence stretched between us. "I didn't know," she whispered. "About you. About this house. About any of it." My breath caught. He had lied to her too. "What did he tell you?" I asked. "That he lived here alone," she replied. "And that you were someone from his past who wouldn't let go." A slow, icy calm spread through my body. "He told me your relationship ended last year," she added. "And that you were struggling to accept it." My throat closed. "Not from heartbreak, from violation." "He said you were unstable," she whispered. "And that he stayed out of guilt." My vision pulsed. He had rewritten my entire identity, not just to her, but to himself, to our families, to the world. I closed my eyes for one slow inhale. And that's when everything shifted. Because for the first time, I understood the full truth. Evan hadn't simply replaced me. He had erased me. But he had made one fatal mistake. He thought I wouldn't do anything about it. If only he knew what was coming next. Em stood in my doorway like someone who just realized the fire she'd been warming her hands over was actually a house burning down. "I'm sorry," she said again, voice shaky. I wouldn't have come if I'd known." "I thought," she swallowed. "I thought I was meeting you because you were causing problems." Of course. He'd turned me into a problem in her story too. I stepped aside. "Do you want to come in?" She hesitated, then nodded. Her eyes swept over the entryway, taking in the framed photos on the wall, most of them of landscapes and work events, barely any of us as a couple. That used to sting. Now it felt like evidence. We sat at the kitchen table I'd picked out, the one he always referred to as ours, when people visited, as if he'd contributed anything more than opinions. Em glanced around nervously. "He said this place was temporary," she murmured. "That he was staying here until his business took off." His business. The startup he'd talked about endlessly but never actually registered. "What exactly did he tell you about me?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She exhaled, shoulders sagging. "That you used to date years ago. That you couldn't accept it was over. That you still showed up here sometimes and made scenes." Her cheeks flushed. "He said he didn't want to kick you out because you were going through a hard time." The lie was elegant, in a sick way. It let him stay in the house I paid for. It made him look compassionate. It made me look unhinged. "How long have you been seeing him?" I asked. She stared at the table. 2 years. My breath left my body in a slow, measured exhale. 2 years. Not a few months. Not a recent mistake. 2 years of split timelines. 2 years of parallel anniversaries. 2 years of him telling one story at home and another everywhere else. But I had no idea what else those 2 years contained. He told me you worked too much, Em continued quietly. That you didn't care about him. That you only cared about money and appearances. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how precise the inversion was. I paid his bills, I said, more to myself than to her. She flinched. He told me he was supporting you. There it was. The alternative narrative in full color. In his version, I was the unstable, dependent ex clinging to him. He was the generous, long-suffering man staying out of loyalty, out of pity, out of moral superiority. What did he say about your relationship? I asked. Her hand curled around the edge of the table. That I was his first real love. She swallowed. And that he'd never felt so understood. Somewhere deep inside, something that had been straining finally snapped, not with chaos, but with a clean, decisive break. This was not just betrayal. It was identity theft. He hadn't just cheated. He had constructed a world where my labor, my stability, my sacrifices were recast as burdens, while he wore my reliability like a costume in front of someone else. And the timeline? I asked. When did he say you started dating? She frowned, thinking. He said you broke up 3 years ago. We started seeing each other soon after that. 3 years. We'd celebrated our Asheville weekend 3 years ago. The cabin I booked. The trip I planned. The trip he'd just reassigned to her on that video call. Time bent in my mind, rearranging itself into a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. It wasn't just that he'd found someone new. He'd been running 2 stories side by side, telling each of us a version where the other was unstable, peripheral, unreal. I thought of my mother, my sister, his friends. How often had he told them I was difficult? Emotional? Hard to deal with? How many times had I walked into a room already pre-labeled? If only I knew how many people already believed his version of me. Em looked up, eyes wet. I swear I didn't know about all this. I thought you were a problem from the past. Someone he was too kind to fully cut off. That word again. Problem. I studied her face. She wasn't lying. She looked like someone who had just realized she'd been given a script with the wrong character names. Why did you come here today? I asked. Really? She inhaled shakily. He's been off lately. Panicky. Controlling. He kept talking about how you were acting out, and she shook her head. Something felt wrong. So I looked up the property records. Of course. The house was in my name. I thought maybe you were the landlord, she said, almost apologetic. Or someone else. But your name was everywhere. Mortgage. Insurance. Everything. Her eyes met mine. That's when I realized none of it made sense. For a strange, surreal moment, I felt grateful to her. Not for being in my home, in my bed, in my stolen stories, that part still made my skin crawl, but for one simple thing, she'd checked. I had spent years doubting myself. She had doubted him. And now? I asked. She hesitated. Now I don't know who I've been with for the last 2 years. I did. She'd been with the same person I had, a man who needed someone to admire him and someone to hold him up, but never the same person in both roles. Can I ask you something? She whispered. Are you going to leave him? The question startled me with its bluntness. For years, I'd reviewed our relationship as if it were a performance I needed to improve. Be more this. Be less that. Work harder. Soften more. Fix the parts that made him unhappy. Leaving had never felt like an option. Not because I couldn't, financially, I could, but because I'd been conditioned to believe that walking away meant I'd failed. But as I looked at Em, the woman he'd used as my shadow, my replacement, my upgraded version in his mind, I realized something. I was the only one in this triangle who wasn't actively lying to herself anymore. And that changed everything. And that's when everything shifted, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. Because in that moment, my question was no longer, is he cheating? It was, what do I want my life to look like without him? But I had no idea yet how deliberate my exit would become. I can't tell you what to do, I said. That's your decision. But I'm done letting him decide who I am. Em nodded slowly. What are you going to do? I thought of Evan's rehearsed speeches, his calendar anniversaries with altered dates, the way he'd talked about bringing her here, into our space, as if I were an old piece of furniture he'd eventually have hauled away. I'm going to stop making it easy for him, I replied. Not loud. Not dramatic. No threats. Just a simple, clean truth. I was financially independent. The mortgage was in my name. The utilities, the car, the accounts, all tied to me. He depended on my stability. And he had built an entire fictional identity on top of that foundation. For the first time, I saw my quietness, my conflict avoidance, my reasonableness not as weaknesses, but as tools. He assumed my calm meant compliance. He'd never considered what would happen if I stayed calm, and stopped cooperating. Em stood up, eyes glassy. I should go. I walked her to the door. Before she stepped out, she turned back. For what it's worth, she said, voice barely above a whisper, he talked about you a lot. Even when he said he hated you, it sounded like he needed you. I nodded once. He does. It wasn't pride. It was fact. He won't see it that way, she warned. I know. When the door closed behind her, the house felt different. Not heavier this time. Lighter. Like something toxic had been aired out, even if only a fraction. I stood in the middle of my living room, and made a decision so quietly I almost missed how monumental it was. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not expose him out of revenge alone. I would expose him with precision. At the right moment. In a way that protected me and left him face to face with the ruins he'd built himself. If only he knew that by turning me into a background character in his story, he'd just pushed me into the director's seat of mine. I didn't confront Evan about him right away. That was my first act of rebellion. For years, I believed that honesty meant immediate confrontation, emotional transparency, sitting down to have long, exhausting conversations that always ended with me apologizing for how I felt. Now I understood that honesty could also mean careful timing. The truth didn't stop being true just because I waited to use it. For 3 days, I watched him closely. His moods. His calls. His rehearsals. I noticed how he moved through my home like a man doing a walkthrough of a property he intended to inherit. Feet on the coffee table. Jacket tossed over chairs. Dishes abandoned in the sink. He didn't say, "Thank you," when I cooked, only complained when something wasn't seasoned the way he liked. He scrolled his phone while I talked about work, then later accused me of never opening up to him. But this time, I wasn't absorbing his distortions. I was studying them. But I had no idea how quickly things would spiral once I made my move. I started with practical steps. First, I opened a new bank account and redirected my direct deposit there. My existing account, the one he occasionally accessed with my permission, still showed a normal balance. I let it. I wanted it to. Then I called the mortgage company and confirmed, in a calm, neutral voice, that no one but me was listed on the deed. I asked a few hypothetical questions about removing an unofficial occupant. Just information gathering, I told myself. No decisions yet. Next, I backed up every important document, digital and physical. Tax returns. Mortgage files. Insurance policies. Email threads proving I'd paid for nearly everything he enjoyed. It didn't feel vengeful. It felt clean. I wasn't planning an attack. I was planning a departure. Twist number 2 began to reveal itself not as a singular event, but as a shift in gravity. I realized that the very things he took for granted about me, my discipline, my financial stability, my tendency to plan 10 steps ahead, were the same tools that made me dangerous to his version of reality. He thought he'd chosen a soft, convenient partner and a passionate, adoring affair. He hadn't realized that the boring one was the one quietly holding the entire structure together. The next time he mentioned M, it was by accident. We were in the kitchen. I was chopping vegetables, he was pretending to help by standing near the fridge. "She's being so dramatic," he muttered, texting furiously. "Who?" I asked, even though I already knew. "A friend." "What's her name?" He rolled his eyes. "You don't know her." "I might," I said. "I meet a lot of people." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Maya." So now I had a full name. Interesting. "What's she upset about?" I asked, slicing through a carrot. He scoffed. "Same thing as always. She wants more than I can give her right now. I keep telling her my focus is on us." He gestured vaguely between us. My hand stayed steady. "On us?" "Yeah," he said, like it should have been obvious. "You and me. I'm trying to fix this relationship, but you keep doubting me." There it was. His favorite magic trick, simultaneously positioning himself as the victim of my suspicion and the hero of our relationship. "You told her that?" I asked quietly. "Of course," he said, puffing up a little. "I'm honest." I almost laughed. He had no idea that the woman he'd cast as his secret soulmate had already stood in this very kitchen, listening to the alternate script he'd written about me. If only he knew how much of his performance I'd already seen from the front row. His behavior toward me began to change when I stopped reacting the way he'd come to expect. I didn't beg for reassurance. I didn't ask where he'd been. I didn't plead for quality time. I was courteous. Neutral. Polite. If he stayed out late, I didn't text. If he mentioned networking, I simply nodded. If he tried to bait me into a fight, I declined the invitation. The more I withdrew my emotional labor, the more desperate he became. He hovered more. He hovered in doorways, asking vague questions about my schedule. He checked my facial expressions when I read my phone, looking for signs that I was upset. "Are you mad at me?" he asked one night, watching me over the edge of his glass. "No," I answered truthfully. "I'm adjusting." "To what?" "To reality." He frowned. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. I let the silence do the work for me. Silence, I'd learned, is not emptiness. It's a mirror. The breaking moment arrived on the same night as that green calendar entry, anniversary dinner. He dressed up, more than usual. Fresh shirt, styled hair, the good cologne. He paced in front of the mirror, rehearsing smiles that looked just shy of sincere. "Big night?" I asked, leaning quietly against the doorway. "Just meeting some people," he said too casually. "Nothing important." "Do you need money?" I asked. He hesitated. Actually, could you cover the card if it doesn't go through? I might be close to the limit. I nodded. Of course. He relaxed instantly. You're amazing, you know that? But I wasn't being generous. I was giving him enough rope. After he left, I opened my laptop and checked the shared card account. He'd made a dinner reservation at a restaurant we'd once planned to visit together but never did, because I'd been too busy working overtime to cover his last business emergency. I stared at the screen, the knots in my stomach loosening into something steadier. I wasn't going to drive there. I wasn't going to crash the dinner. That's what he expected, a dramatic scene he could retell later as proof of my instability. Instead, I picked up my phone and called Em. She answered on the second ring, voice wary. Hello? It's me, I said. We should talk. One last time. She exhaled shakily. He told me you were harassing him. Are you going to the anniversary dinner? I asked. Silence. Then a soft, stunned, how do you know about that? He put it in our shared calendar, I said. On my account. Realization hit her like a wave I could hear through the phone. He told me, she whispered, that he was finally going to tell you the truth. That we were going to move in together. He said tonight was about closure, for you. So he'd promised her my house. My stability. My space. And that's when everything shifted again, not outwardly, but inside me. Because I understood then that she wasn't the chosen one. She was just, next in line for the same role. The adored one in his public narrative. The supporting character in the life he expected someone else to fund. But I had no idea how fast his illusion would start collapsing once I pulled just one thread. I'm not going to interfere with your dinner, I said quietly. Go. Listen. Watch what he says. What are you going to do? She asked. Stay home, I replied. And make some changes. What kind of changes? The kind that don't require his permission. There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, will you let me know what you decide? I considered this. You'll see it, I said. Everyone will. After I hung up, I moved through the house with a clarity that felt almost serene. I gathered his documents, the few that existed, into a neat stack. I unplugged his gaming console, his speakers, the expensive gadgets I'd purchased for us that he'd claimed as his. I put them all into 2 large boxes and set them by the door. Then I printed a copy of the mortgage showing my name and only my name. I placed it on the coffee table, weighed down with the lipstick I'd found. A small still life of reality. Finally, I opened my email and wrote 3 messages. 1 to my mother. 1 to my sister. 1 to a group thread that included a few mutual friends. Not a rant. Not a character assassination. Just a series of simple statements. I own the house. I've been financially supporting Evan for years. He has been in a relationship with another woman for 2 years, during which he told her I was an unstable ex he was helping out of guilt. I am ending our relationship and asking him to move out. No theatrics. No adjectives. Just facts. I attached 1 screenshot, a single example of his messages to M, the dates making clear the overlap. Then I scheduled each email to send at a specific time, 9 p.m. Halfway through their anniversary dinner. Not to humiliate him. Not to destroy him. But to ensure there was finally a written record of my side of the story, one he couldn't overwrite with his rehearsed monologues. If only he knew that while he was out there performing the role of the aggrieved hero, I was quietly dismantling the stage beneath him. Evan came home later than usual that night. I knew the emails had gone out at 9. I imagined the scene the way I used to imagine our future, except this time, I wasn't in the room. He'd be midway through a scripted monologue, bathed in flattering restaurant lighting, when everyone's phones vibrated all at once. I pictured him laughing it off at first. Then reading. Then realizing. But I had no idea what state he'd be in when he finally walked through my door. The house was dim when his key turned in the lock. I sat on the couch, legs crossed, hands folded in my lap. Calm. Not because I wasn't shaken, but because I refused to let his chaos decide my posture anymore. The door opened. Closed. His footsteps were heavier than usual, uneven. He stopped when he saw the boxes by the entrance. His gaze slid from them to the coffee table, the mortgage printout, my name bold and unaccompanied. The lipstick resting on top like punctuation. His voice came out hoarse. "What is this?" "A visual aid," I said. He stared at me, eyes bloodshot, hair slightly mussed. "Did you send them those emails?" I didn't ask who they were. I already knew, my family. His friends. Anyone whose opinion he'd been curating for years. "Yes," I said simply. He inhaled sharply through his nose. "You humiliated me." I tilted my head. "I told the truth." "That was private," he snapped. "No," I replied softly. "What you did was private. What I did was clarifying." But I had no idea how desperately he would cling to the ruins of his version. He paced the room like a caged thing, hands raking through his hair. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he shouted. "My mother called me in the middle of dinner. She was crying. Crying. She thinks I'm some kind of..." He cut himself off, searching for a word softer than what he was. "Villain," he finished weakly. I didn't move. "What did you tell her?" "That you exaggerated," he said quickly. "That you're angry. That you're making things sound worse than they are." "Did you deny the affair?" I asked. His jaw clenched. "That's between us." "The mortgage isn't between us," I said evenly, tapping the paper with one finger. "The bank account isn't between us. The years I supported you are not between us. They're facts." He glared at me, eyes shining with a mix of rage and panic. "You blindsided me." "I was blindsided 2 years ago," I answered. "I just didn't know it." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "This is my home too," he finally muttered. "No," I said, letting the word land with the weight of all the nights I'd stayed up working while he slept. "This is my home. You've been living here." He scoffed. "Wow. So I'm what? Some kind of charity case now?" "You always were," I said, not unkindly. "You just preferred the version where you were my savior." He flinched like I'd hit him. He tried a new angle. "I should have known," he sneered. "With how insecure you are next to your sister. You always needed to be the one in control. The successful one. The provider." It was a familiar jab, drawn from my oldest wound, the one about standing in Lily's shadow. But something had shifted. His words no longer found purchase. "Yes," I said quietly. "I am the provider. That's why this conversation is happening on my terms." He stared at me, thrown by my lack of defense. "I'm not doing this," he muttered, turning toward the bedroom. "I need to lie down." "You're not sleeping here tonight," I said. He froze. Turned back slowly. "Excuse me?" I stood, my legs steady under me. "You're not sleeping here. Not in this bed. Not in this house. Not anymore." His laugh was brittle. "You can't be serious." "I've given you 30 days," I said, sliding a printed notice across the table. It's dated. Documented. I've consulted with someone about how to do this properly. You're not being thrown out tonight. You're being transitioned out. He snatched the paper and scanned it, his face flushing. You think this piece of paper means anything? It does to the kind of people who resolve things without screaming, I replied. I could see him calculating. In his eyes, I watched the math assemble itself. No savings, no property, no stable job, no other place ready to take him in permanently. No narrative where he could plausibly paint himself as the abandoned one without contradicting what everyone now knew. He shifted tactics again, as if shuffling through a deck of familiar manipulations. After everything I've done for you, he said, voice shaking. You mean after everything I've done for you, I corrected. His breathing grew shallow. You're going to regret this. No one's going to put up with you like I did. I'm counting on that, I said. He blinked. What? I don't want anyone to put up with me ever again, I said. I want someone who sees me. That's different. If only he knew that this wasn't anger speaking, it was relief. His phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down reflexively. For a moment, his expression cracked open completely. I saw her name. M. Don't, I said quietly. Don't answer that here. Not in my house. He swallowed. She's upset. So am I said. You can tend to one of those fires. Choose. He hesitated. Declined the call. A small, sad irony curled in my chest. He'd spent years trying to juggle two versions of himself, the charming victim with her, the burdened hero with me. Now both stories were imploding and he still couldn't decide which role to play. Where am I supposed to go? He asked, voice suddenly small. Your mother called you, I said. Maybe start there. Or a friend. Or a hotel. You have options. He scoffed. You just throw me away like that. You threw me away 2 years ago, I replied. I'm just catching up. He stared at me for a long time. For a moment, I saw something like comprehension pass through his eyes, a flicker of awareness that this wasn't a phase, a tantrum, or a bluff. This was real. Final. Logged in emails and documents and dates that didn't bend just because he wished they would. And that's when everything shifted, I realized, even as we faced each other. Because I no longer needed him to admit what he'd done. His acknowledgement, or lack of it, was irrelevant to my next steps. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about leaving a life that no longer deserved me. He grabbed his keys, his charger, the jacket he liked best. That's mine, I said, pointing to the designer coat I'd bought him last Christmas. He glared at me, then dropped it on the chair. You're cold, he spat. I'm done, I corrected. He opened the door, then turned back as if expecting something, a last-second plea, a tearful apology, a promise to reconsider. I gave him none of it. Good night, Evan, I said. He stared at me, his mouth opening, closing, then forming one last threadbare line of defense. You're going to end up alone, he said. People will see what you really are. Maybe, I said. And maybe they'll see what you really are too. Either way, I'll be fine. He slammed the door. This time, the silence that followed wasn't oppressive. It was clean. But I had no idea yet how quickly his carefully curated world would start collapsing without my silence to prop it up. Within days, the fallout began. My mother called first. Her voice was tight, controlled. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me? I asked. She was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, I should have. Lily came over uninvited, bringing takeout and a fierce hug. "He tried to call me," she said, settling cross-legged on my couch. "He said you're exaggerating." I told him I saw him at the Wild Lantern. He hung up. My chest loosened. Not because everyone suddenly saw me as perfect, but because they finally saw him clearly. I received one short, clipped text from one of his friends. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you were doing for him. If you need help moving anything, let me know." I didn't need the help. But I kept the message anyway. Not as proof that I'd won, but as a quiet reminder that my reality wasn't something I had to carry alone anymore. I spent the next days reclaiming the house room by room. Changing the bedding. Rearranging the furniture. Removing the items that were his and placing them neatly by the door for him to collect when he was ready, supervised, on my terms, at a time we'd agreed to in writing. No screaming. No scenes. Just a boundary that no longer bent. I walked through each space and noticed, with a strange clarity, how much of myself I'd hidden to make room for him. Books I'd stopped buying because he mocked my taste. Colors I'd stopped wearing because he said they were too loud. Hobbies I'd set aside because they didn't involve him. Now, the house felt like a blank page. Not empty. Available. If only I'd known earlier that the worst thing he could do to me wasn't leaving, it was convincing me I didn't exist without him. He had failed at that. I was still here. More here, in fact, than I'd been in years. And this time, I was writing the story. 6 months later, the house feels entirely different. Not bigger, calmer. Like the walls finally exhaled when he left, releasing years of tension I hadn't realized I was carrying in my shoulders, my jaw, my breath. My plants are thriving again. The kitchen smells of citrus and fresh bread on Sundays. And in the living room, sunlight hits the floor just right, widening into a warm, gold patch I never noticed before. Maybe it was always there. Maybe I was too busy walking around the edges of someone else's chaos to see it. Evan moved out exactly 30 days after that night. Not one day sooner. Not one day later. He tried one last emotional performance during the key handoff, trembling voice, wounded eyes, but it fell flat even to him. The script no longer matched the audience. He left with the 2 boxes I'd packed. Nothing more. 3 weeks later, I heard from M. One simple text: "You were right." He told me everything. And nothing at all. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but closure. There was nothing left in that triangle that needed tending. She stepped out of his story, just as I had, and I hoped she found something steadier on the other side. As for him, the collapse was quiet but predictable. His mother told my sister that Evan had been unwell, drifting between friends' couches, unable to keep a job, still rehearsing versions of himself that no longer convinced the people around him. His relationship with Em lasted barely 2 months after my exit. The gravity that had held her in orbit around him disappeared once the center, my stability, was gone. You can't build a fantasy on a foundation that isn't yours. He'd rewritten me out of his life, but he forgot that I was the one holding the pen. As for me, I took the trip to Asheville again. Not to relive a stolen memory, to reclaim it. The same twisting roads through the Blue Ridge Mountains, the same scent of pine and cold morning air, but everything felt different. I stayed in a cabin with wide windows and a view of the valley. In the evenings, I cooked simple meals, listened to the crackle of the fireplace, and let my body recalibrate to silence that didn't feel oppressive. One morning, while drinking coffee on the porch, a man approached from the neighboring cabin, a quiet, observant smile, the kind that didn't ask anything of me. "Beautiful sunrise," he said. "It is," I replied, surprising myself with the ease of my voice. He didn't hover. He didn't demand. He didn't turn the moment into something heavy. He just nodded and returned to his cabin, leaving the air unchanged. A small, gentle reminder: attention doesn't have to cost you anything. Or take anything from you. Back home, I repainted the front door a warm, earthy red. A color Evan once said didn't fit the vibe. Now it fits mine perfectly. I framed a photo from the Asheville trip, the sun rising over the mountains, and placed it in the hallway where his discarded jackets once hung. Every time I pass it, I feel something settle inside me. I am not invisible in my own home anymore. I am not the other one in someone else's story. I am here. Present. Chosen, by myself, finally and fully. And that, more than any revenge I could have scripted, is the real ending. Or maybe, the beginning. If you like this story, feel free to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one.